everyone, and welcome to our second panel of the day. It's my honor to be here with all of you to discuss the fight for Black liberation, a fight that has existed on the North American continent for centuries. From the Civil Rights Movement to the Black Lives Matter movement, and to all the people and movements that came before, the work to overcome oppression and to recognize Black humanity continues to this day. Now, while certain tactics and organizing principles have evolved, the mission remains the same: to not only build a world where Black people have the opportunity to live in peace, but to build a world in which they can thrive. So it's with great humility that I introduce the civil rights activist, Xernona Clayton, co-executive director of the Highlander Research and Education Center, Ashley Woodard Henderson, and founder of the Next Gen Come Up, Anya Dillard. Together, we will discuss their ongoing work for grassroots organizing and movement building across generations. Thank you all for being here. So for my first question, today we are privileged to have three extraordinary Black liberation leaders, spanning from the civil rights movement through the millennial and Gen Z generations. I would love to start by asking each of you, what's changed? And what has stayed the same since the civil rights movement? From the history you experienced or learned about, what has remained central to the movement? And in what ways do you think the fight has evolved? We're digging into some serious, thoughtful questions this evening.
Well, I'll start with the fact
Thank
that
you, Jenna.
I just had a birthday and I was 91.
Happy birthday to you. That's wonderful, wonderful.
Thank you very much. But you have to remember that I worked with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. When I start there, then you kind of know where to place me in the order of our struggle. We knew for certain that we had a fight on our hands. We knew that some white people were not going to give up any change in their lifestyle. We knew that white people were not buying what we were selling. And so it was kind of very clear to us what our problems were, what our fight was all about, what our approach ought to be. And so when you start there, you can place me in that setting. Dr. King used to talk about how difficult it was to understand why white people just didn't want us. It was hard to understand that because, you know, he was a minister and he came from the church. His father was a minister before him. And he was taught that under the skin, we're all the same. That God created each of us in his own image, and we are the same. And we had rights. The Constitution provided us as Black Americans some rights, but we weren't getting the benefits of those rights. And we look around and see white people came to the shores of America just seeking a better life. Our people were dragged over here and thrown in ships and brought here for servitude. And that's the way they were treated. And we start way back with the historical perspective. What do you do to change that? Well, Dr. King said you got to fight, fight, fight. But know what you're fighting for. You're fighting for equality and justice. And even the framers of the Constitution didn't think that we'd have to get our rights in doses. You know, we were granted our rights. We should have had them all. but we didn't get them all. And even today, we are still fighting and hoping and praying because we're not there yet. Now, we've made a lot of progress under Dr. King's leadership and those of us who fought with him. We got some fair housing, some legislation, and some things that I think we all know what we were granted at the time. But you feel so pained when you think you're making progress and you go to a city like Birmingham, and there were little black boys and girls trying to swim in the swimming pool that was the city owned and operated. But those children's parents, if they owned their own home, they were helping to pay the taxes that made that swimming pool possible. Yet they threw lye in the pool to keep the children from swimming. Well, right away, you know that there's hatred beyond just people who just want to talk about it. Lye is no joke. And so the children were injured and harmed when they did swim. So you got to take care of that. And in the middle of the night, they slip and slide and out trick you. While you were busy all the time, just trying to live as an individual with inalienable rights in this place called God Bless America. We all sing that. But when I look back now retrospectively, I will say that the fight, as difficult as it was worth it. Because here we are today still looking for the rights that we thought we had already gotten. But just trying to remain a human being, just trying to live your life decently gets to be a hard matter. But then you can't give up. That's the one thing I wanted to say to people all the time. Just don't give up the fight. Keep the spirit of the fight in your uppermost existence. Your life is worth living. You have a right to life. You have a right to live the life you want. And if you can afford it, go for it. We still have a lot of work to do. And people often ask me, if Dr. King would come back here today and see our conditions, what would he say? And I said, the first thing he'd say, you all ain't solved that problem yet. He would like to think that we worked so hard, so fearlessly, so arduously, so long, that at some point you win. It's like the artist, the culturist who's singing, she concertizes until she gets it right. The performer, the actor, works on his lines until he gets it right. And you keep on working, try to remember your lines and the play, you eventually get it right. That's what we like to think, that at some point we get it right, and we're trying hard as Black Americans, but we're not getting the partnership of getting it right in America. And that's where we are today, trying to get everybody to understand that we're entitled to what we have been granted by law. We just want to be equal, not special treatment.
Oh my gosh, I feel like I just had, an entire course on what's happened, what Black people have gone through, and I'm feeling really emotional right now. Thank you so much for that context, for your perspective, for the fight. And what I really hear you say is that the fight continues, it continues and continues. And so I'd like to hear what Ashley and Anya have to say about that, about being the ones who are inheriting this, who are taking the baton. What does that feel like? And how do you see what Xernona Clayton has done? How does that inform what you're doing and your vision? Whoever would like to address that first, please do.
Yes, I have, so much respect for Miss Clayton, and I feel as though there are so many things that we think about when we think of the revolution today, when we think of this new age civil rights movement going on. The words of so many amazing Black revolutionaries that pioneered the civil rights movement have aged too well. And that's the whole idea, right? You listen to speeches by Martin Luther King, by Malcolm X, and it's as if someone could have tweeted that the other day, or someone could have said that to a friend on the street just, last week. And when you think about, how hard so many young Black people have worked, people that dedicated their lives, that sacrificed their lives for this fight decades ago, and you look at the conditions that we're in today, and you see people my age, people younger out in the street with megaphones and with power fists up and are still, exhausting that fight. Sometimes you wonder, like, well, what's it all for? Where are we going if all of that energy just went into ending up in a much similar place? And I think that it's easy to get stuck in that, like in that, illusion of lack of movement, when really, there's so much development in that. There's so much going on the outside that oftentimes, because of how much we digest, because of the negativity and the weight that we carry as people that are moving in it now, we forget in retrospect just how far we've come from the civil rights movement. And I think one of the major things that has changed is, like Miss Clayton said, that intersectionality, that understanding that we all bleed red at the end of the day. And I think that, especially with younger generations, people are starting to realize that as long as there is oppression, regardless it be on Black people, on the LGBTQ plus community, on disabled people, regardless of what, if there is systematic oppression, if there are people who are suffering simply because they're different than the majority or different than white people, then no one will be equal in this country, in this world. No one will have the opportunity to live fully, to find joy, to find success, to find that fulfillment in life that ultimately those same revolutionaries were fighting for. So regardless of, who we're able to sit across the aisle with, if those people are not able to view our struggle as theirs as well, then we ultimately won't advance. And I think that that's something that keeps me optimistic, going to rallies and seeing not just my people, not just the people who are fighting or who are victimized by the cause, but people that see it, people that can acknowledge, like, this is real, you are suffering. I need to relay my allyship to you. I need to, use my privilege and use the resources that I have to help to push your fight forward, to give you that platform that society may not lend you by default. So I think that that's something that, continues to grow and continues to change, and young people's ability to realize the importance of seeing everyone as just human and moving forward with love rather than bias and hatred. That's something that I think has massively evolved, not just the movement, but how, young revolutionaries move throughout it and make connections and, strategize towards creating a better future for tomorrow. So, yeah.
Thank you, Anya. Beautifully said. You said so much that was so rich and so deep, but what really stood out for me was that you used the word optimism. And that's something that I was actually thinking about when I was just doing some reading about the three of you and what we would be discussing today. And I wondered, are you hopeful? Are you optimistic? And so, Ashley, I'm going to throw this question to you. Are you hopeful and are you optimistic? And if you could actually address the initial question as well from that angle, I'd love to hear what you had to say. Thank you.
Absolutely. And just first of all, just grateful for you, Karen, for your moderation of this panel and to be here with my sisters and comrades in struggle. It is a blessing to be in your presence. I learn from you every time I hear your voices. So I'm grateful for this sacred space and to Peace Studios for bringing us together. So yeah, I mean, y'all know I work at the Highlander Research and Education Center. I'm the first Black woman to serve in this sort of executive director capacity in a co-directorship with the Reverend Alan Maxfield Steele. And we came into leadership December of 2016. Y'all might remember that, you know, this pretty major election had happened literally weeks, just a couple of weeks before it was announced that the first Black woman to serve in an executive director position at Highlander was coming in to serve. And what I've found, one, being a Black woman, a Black queer woman at that, from the South, is that we live in the past, present, and future at the same time every day. So when I hear this question, like actually what informs my optimism is my answer to this question about what has changed and what has stayed the same. It's not a naive optimism that I carry. It is a concrete analysis of concrete conditions that we're winning, that we've always been winners, and that's why the challenges are so stark. But I'll make that plain as concisely as possible as I answer this question. You know, one of the things that I think has stayed the same is, you know, since, you know, our elder comrades like Miss Clayton, like, you know, Miles Horton, like Martin Luther King, like Malcolm X, like Diane Nash, and all of the other incredible folks from the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and all the folks that were around, all the Congress of Racial Equality folks, all of our people, the Black Panther Party, right? The US organization, all of the folks that were holding it down in the 60s and 70s made very, very clear is that you cannot be neutral. There is no such thing as neutrality. You are either, as Dr. King said, bending the moral arc of the universe towards justice, or you are precluding its ability to be bent. But you're not just standing on the sidelines, right? And I think that what we saw in 2020, as some of the very folks that have been on these panels have told you, is that as we built the largest social movement in US history, we were building on the lessons and the foundation that was set by our elders and ancestors centuries ago, and our elders that are still here with us. And so our ability to get there was through people recognizing they couldn't just sit on the sidelines and pretend to be neutral. That myth of neutrality was actually literally condoning the cumulative Black death of our people in this country. And so seeing more people choosing to be a part of the other America that would choose peace, that would choose justice, that would choose not only equality, but equity for all of our people so that we can all live in sustainable and healthy communities, that informs my optimism. You know, I also think that what has changed is the amount of the concentration of wealth and power by rich white men in this country and abroad, right? Is that the amount of wealth that we're talking about being extracted from communities like ours, people that love and look and live like us, that power is being consolidated at our expense. And what we've seen is people say they've had enough, that we believe that there is enough to go around for everybody, not only to have what they need, but also what they want, right? That there's plenty of wealth in this country to be able to provide the things that we want for our communities, which I think informs us like making demands of what we actually deserve, not just what we would concede to. And I feel like I learned how to do that from people like Miss Clayton, from people like Margaret Block, from people like Bob Moses, from people like Cortland Cox, from people like Charlie Cobb, right? Like those folks taught us, I feel like, how to do this work in a way that is unapologetic, that is rooted in our values and our radical notions of how the world ought to be. And not just radical as in left, but radical as in changing the root causes of the problems that we're facing. That informs my optimism, that there's so many, that folks are recognizing that Black is not a monolith, right? That we have different organizing traditions. You can be Black and Indigenous, you could be Black and Latinx, you could be Black and queer, you could be Black and disabled, and that those folks are leading social movements in this country and abroad, that we have to have an internationalist politic. All of this, how could we not win with that kind of a background, right? Like that folks are, it's funny to hear people even on this panel talking about passing torches, when what I know is that Miss Clayton is still working. She's 91 and she's still fighting for justice for her people, right? Like ain't no baton to pass. We just out here in these streets together doing what we can, right? And I think that because the Black movement has built an intergenerational, multi-generational movement is why I know we can't help but win, why we can't help but sustain those wins, that we are building multi-tactical, right? People are doing protests. People are doing policy and advocacy work. Folks are organizing in base building. People are doing political education work, right? Multiple tactics across sectors, because what we know is that Black people are disproportionately impacted by every single issue you can name. If you talk about healthcare, I can tell you about how COVID disproportionately impacts Black people. If you want to talk about, labor, I can talk to you about the centuries worth of wealth extraction from our labor that built this country. If you want to talk about gender justice, I can talk about how Black women make pennies to the dollars of even white women in this country, right? Like, we can talk about every single issue. It's a Black issue. Climate, right? As I was, me and Ms. Clayton were just talking about how it's been raining in Tennessee every day for the last, billion years. That is disproportionately impactful to Black people, right? So we're building not only multi-tactical strategies, we're building them across sector. And though we are built, like I proudly lead the movement for Black lives, and though we are unapologetic about the fact that it is just about Black people, what is clear is that we are building a Black-led multicultural movement, multiracial movement as well. And that's what got the goods last year. If you want to know what made a difference last year, other than the grief and rage and of the cumulative Black death in this country and abroad, and the deep and contagious love that we have for Black people, the biggest thing was that we knew that we had to come together across our differences to change the material conditions of our people immediately. And so, am I joyful? Am I happy? Absolutely. Because one, I know that everything in white supremacist, capitalist, patriarchal, all these other systems of oppression that come together trying to make my life a living hell, that the thing that they want the most is for me to be miserable and defeated. I refuse to give them that. So you might see me mad in the streets. I'll do that. You might see me screaming and yelling and going to jail. I might do that too. But the thing that continues to fuel this movement isn't just our rage, right? It isn't just our rage. It's our contagious Black joy. And I think that's the weapon that they can't defeat.
Amen, amen, amen. That's definitely a mic drop moment. As you were speaking, I was literally feeling this sense of like this amen corner and all of the ancestors and spirits just right here infused in this moment, and just celebrating that we have, yes, there's so much more to do, but we've come so far. And this old hymn from my history comes to mind. We've come this far by faith. So thank you for that.
Can I interrupt
yes,
a moment? She was talking about, optimism, how do we feel? One of my jobs early on was to go knock on doors and try to get people to go and vote. And we had just had that awful picture of Reverend C.T. Vivian and several Black ministers down in Alabama who were beaten severely, and blood runs down their faces. This on, television. And I thought that people will feel the pain of those pictures and get out and vote. And guess what they'd say? Oh, well, my daughter hasn't called yet, and I don't know whether I'm going to get a ride to the polls or not. Oh, my back was kind of hurting, and I think I'll just stay in bed. And I would say, have you seen the pictures of the blood? Trying to make it dramatic enough that people at least go vote. And so it was very disappointing to me when you come back empty-handed, like, oh, we didn't get many, voters today. And yet this last election gave me hope that I haven't had in a long time. I mean, to see the people lined up, and it was not only here in Georgia, but with wherever you live too, those beautiful pictures of Black people standing in line with the heat and the sweat on their brows, the long lines, the machines breaking down. And a newsman asked people, you still in line? Yes. Well, how long are you going to stand here? She said, until I get my name in that ballot box. That was a picture I won't forget. If that doesn't give you optimism, then nothing will. And so I feel like now that, although I was going downhill because I said, oh, Lord, it looks like our people are not going to get the message clearly, that we got to all keep going. But the optimism is here now, and I'm ready to wait for the next election and hope that we still keep that verve and vivacity going, that until we put people in office who we want and not just take what is given to us, then maybe we'll have a better life after all. One of these days, we're going to get there.
Yes, yes. That's a that's a beautiful wish, a beautiful dream, and it's a perfect segue for my next question, which actually is for you, Miss Clayton, which is, so I know that you were the first Black person in the South to host a regularly scheduled primetime television talk show, and then the first Black woman corporate executive at Turner Broadcasting. So I'm wondering, like, what differences have you noticed in the stories that are being told about Black people over the past decades? And then how do you think these stories are affecting the movement for Black liberation?
Well, if you remember, well, you're too young to remember, all of you are too young to know. When I went on television, there was nobody here but me. So I opened the door of opportunity, and that's my greatest joy. But once we got the doors open, and African American, male and female, are now all over the networks, I recognize that the time has come now that we can make more change inside than we can make outside. And so when people say they don't want to do this, don't want to do that, they're shirking responsibility, because you can make a difference inside. I worked at Turner Broadcasting with Ted Turner, a man who was a billionaire and always wanted more and more and more, and he worked at that. But he was strict about those spending those dollars. But when I came to him with ideas that would help bring Black people up to the same level that white people have in opportunities in the workplace, he saw it differently. So you can help make change. And I can tell you this, that when I came up with the idea of the Trumpet Awards, where we were to have Black people on television with dignity, speaking English, showing us the benefits of their successes and their achievements and their contributions to the richness of this great America. He even said to me, and that was so atypical of Ted Turner, who said, I want this program, I like it, it's a hit, and I don't care whether you make money or not. Can you imagine this rich man said he didn't care? He didn't really mean that literally. But he gave me a blanket of approval. And I was able to show, because Dr. King, let me put a pin in this, Dr. King said it was not his thinking that all white people hated us just because they loved to hate. He had felt that maybe they just didn't know our contributions. And had they known the role we have played, although in servitude, they perhaps would hate us less. And I can tell you this, I found that to be a truism. We had calls, telephone calls from people. I'll just give you one example, because this example is explicable of many. This woman called me and said she stumbled upon the Trumpet Awards and saw these Black people who had invented a way to preserve blood for anybody, not just him or his family, but for anybody, because there was a time you couldn't preserve blood. He created a way to have it so anybody who got sick and needed blood is preserved, and there it is on somebody's shelf. Of course, he went to a convention in Alabama, and on the way home, or Florida, on the way back to Chicago, they had an automobile accident, and it was a severe one for him, and he almost died. And they said, we need blood transfusion quickly. They took him to the hospital to save his life. When they found out he was Black, they denied him the blood that he'd helped preserve, and he died. The woman said she'd never heard stories like we were telling. She never knew that Black people were contributing so much. because her own mother and father taught her to hate all Black people, that all Black men would rather stand in line to get a government check than get a paycheck. All Black women would rather have a baby than have a job. And so they're just siphoning from the coffers. So we don't want to have anything to do with Black people. So she grew up hating us. There's one incident I'm sharing with you now. She got a new respect for Black people. She said we pierced her thinking. She went to the libraries, got books, and she said, Miss Clayton, I have 2 little girls. She said, I'm so excited. I've learned that what my parents taught me is not true. My 2 girls, one is 2 and one is 4. And I want them to grow up and know the truth about Black people. You've helped me tremendously. Now, through my television program, we had a chance to do a bit of education. That's not enough. But when you put it all together, now we got more Black people now on the airwaves. And if they stop acting like clowns, that's what I used to say, because I got tired of just our Black people being comedic all the time. I mean, people didn't know we had people with great intellect. We never saw them. And that was my beef about what the television was doing. It was depriving the public of knowing the contributions of our people. We could say if, and but, like everybody else, not ain't all the time. And so I take great pride in the fact that I started something that was necessary, it was important, and it got bigger and better ever since. So the joy for me is I open the door of opportunity. If we all did that, then all the eyes of white America would see that we're just not here occupying space. We're making valuable contributions to the riches of this great America. Thank you.
Thank you for that. So Ms. Clayton was just sharing about the importance and significance of stories, of understanding who Black people are and the images that are projected that have been so many times negative ones, and that when we get to know individuals, we get to understand who they are, and that it's not just about this stereotypical character that you might see on a TV screen. And so I guess I wanted to ask Ashley, because of her work with the Highlander Center, which was a crucial and sacred resource to the organizing efforts of the civil rights movement, training and welcoming leaders such as Rosa Parks and John Lewis. But there have been very important stories that have been left out of history textbooks. And so I'm wondering, Ashley, that as you work today to train the next generation of Southern freedom fighters, why is it important to bring this history to light now? And why is it particularly important that we discuss the history in the context of Southern history?
Yeah, I mean, anyone who knows me knows that I am a proud Southern supremacist. And let me tell you why. I mean, you know, the South, for one, is the largest geographic region in the United States. You know, the debate is it's at least 14, maybe 15 states, depending on if you claim Oklahoma. I do. And, you know, quite frankly, it's also where the highest concentration of Black people in the country live. So how, again, to our previous conversation, how couldn't it be the place of solution, not just the place that's continuously narratively considered the backward, right? The weak link, right? The right-wing hub of all things bad, when what I know for certain is that it has been the tip of the spear for most revolutionary interventions in this country, right? I believe that as goes the South, so goes the nation is not an opinion, it is a fundamental fact. Ask me how I know? Because we've got centuries worth of evidence, right? Do you think that you would have an abolitionist movement without the South? How? Right? How do you get this underground railroad history, this history of even white people choosing the other America in rebellion to the Confederacy, right? Again, to the question about optimism, what I know is that it's not just that we're getting beat down, and we're just resilient because we've learned how to take a punch. What happens is that we build an alternative to the United States that we inherited that is good for not only Black people, but all people. And then this handful of angry white rich dudes get mad about it. And they do everything in their power to consolidate their wealth and power. And they respond to abolition with with Black codes, right? And with fighting back against the Black electoral power that Black people built in the South during Reconstruction. So then what do? Well, we build movement, right? And then, we're gonna jump a few decades, but you're gonna get to like the 50s and 60s where like the Rosa Parks, the Miss Claytons, the Martin Luther Kings, the Mukasa Rickses, right? Like all of these incredible freedom fighters in the 50s, 60s, and 70s say, enough with the Jim Crow Black codes, done with that. We're building a movement. Now, obviously, it was called civil rights, but they wanted Black liberation. That was the goal. Civil rights was one tactical intervention on the road to liberation. Voting was important as a particular tactic to learn how to govern. Right? That was the point. And then what does the state does? It adapts, right? Capitalism adapts. White supremacists adapt, and they figured out how to use COINTELPRO and the state, right? The counterintelligence program and the state to dismantle and disrupt this incredible movement that was built, right? To the point of political prisoners, right? We still have comrades locked up in cages for fighting for Black liberation decades ago. We still have comrades that have to live in exile, Ashada Shakur, right? For fighting for Black liberation, right? We still have elders that, like, everybody's talking about retiring. We have elders that will work till their fingers are blue because they are literally still in the fight to win liberation for Black people. So why does it matter? Well, it matters now because what we need to know is that, yeah, we might be winning. That might be true, but the state is adapting. Right? What we know, and I mean, Anya could speak to this probably even better than I can, is that we have folks that participated in protests in defense of Black lives last year, who the Movement for Black Lives just, dropped this report, The Struggle for Power, that shows that Donald Trump literally told William Barr to charge these young people, these elders, these people of goodwill with federal charges that had state and local equivalents for the sake of giving them even more harsh sentences, right? The Highlander Center was attacked by white supremacists as recently as 2019, right? They burned down our administrative offices. This fight, this visceral, violent attack against the peace movement that we're building is alive and well, and that doesn't mean we're losing. It means that there are things that we should be learning from our elders. There are things that we should be paying attention to in our concrete analysis of the concrete conditions of now that can inform us making strategic interventions right now that set us up for 50 years worth of thriving in the future, right? That's the point to me. And why I think it matters that the South be a part of that conversation is, again, if we believe in racial equity and we believe in Black liberation, the majority of us are in the Black Belt South. The majority of us are in the South and Appalachia in this country. And we are actually building sustainable, equitable, and healthy movements that are informing and influencing the material conditions of communities all across this region. And that's not just a historical fact. That's true right now. There's organizations, grassroots organizations all over the South that are building things like the Southern Movement Assembly. I think about Project South, the Institute for the Elimination of Poverty and Genocide in Atlanta, where Ms. Clayton is. I think about Alternate Roots, the incredible crew of cultural organizers. I think about Southerners on New Ground, the dangerous homosexuals of the South who are fighting for the liberation of all people, right? There's so many grassroots organizations in every Southern state across issue area who are making ways out of no ways with minimal philanthropic support that are saving lives every day, that are implementing strategies that if the rest of the country paid attention to might actually change the game. The period on the sentence for me is twofold. One is like Ms. Clayton talked about this powerful story about voting and not only how that impacted Black folks, but again, when Black folks vote and they pass policies with those elected officials that they elected, it changes the conditions for everybody, right? We know that to be true. If you don't know that, check out affirmative action. The people that benefit from affirmative action the most, even though Black people fought for it, are white women, right? But even if that wasn't true, look at 2020, y'all. Look at what we did in Georgia. Look at what we almost did in Florida and Texas. And tell me that and you know, let's not even forget to mention, especially for the Hamilton fans, Washington, D.C. is actually in the U.S. South, right? So quite literally, as goes the nation's capital, so goes the, right? So goes the nation's capital in the South, so goes the nation, right? But look at what we almost did in Texas and Florida. Look at what we did in Georgia. Look at the, you know, the elections in Alabama. Look at the fact that we've got an incredible Black movement operative in the mayor's seat in Jackson, Mississippi, the belly of the beast, right? And tell me that there aren't spectacular things happening in the experiment of governance and democracy in this country that are being led by Black Southerners. Right? We can talk about Stacey Abrams all day. The thing that she would tell you first is that she's from the South, right? And for every one of her, we've got 10 million other folks that are ready and willing to go, right? So for me, why it's important to talk about the history is actually not to make Highlander a living museum. We are not. What is important is that we are contemporarily being the tip of the spear on all things movement building. And we are doing that in right relationship with organizations all over the US South. And even more importantly, we're doing that and building those relations nationally and internationally. And we are seeing the fruit of that labor. So, you know, again, I mean, it takes me right back to the first questions, or the first questions that you asked is like, why am I so optimistic? Is because I know we're winning, because there's no way in the world that these white supremacist organizations, paramilitary forces, the interventions of the state would be coming so hard for us if we weren't doing something right, if we weren't so close to being in a place where we could actually not only win power, because that's what we're talking about. We're not talking about just winning and by like making a bunch of good fighters, right? That's not the win. The win is not having to fight at all and just being able to actually live in what liberation and freedom and justice looks like in practice, which will be another kind of work for our movement, right? For Black liberation movement. It'll be different to control the economy and have to govern a place. That's new work for us in some ways. But I think we're ready for it. And I think that what we need to be doing is figuring out, what does that mean for our longer arc of work, right? What will that mean for my grandbabies, right? That's the work that we need to start prioritizing.
Well, I'd like to, that's a really good point. I'd like to segue then into asking Anya a question, just because she does represent the youngest member of this panel. And not only that, she has discussed and has talked about the fact that while she's, you know, an advocate for Black people, it's not just about one particular issue. And I know that the issue of climate change is really important to her. I read somewhere, I think it was an interview with Anti-Racism Daily, that she mentioned that, quote, "Racism and climate change have a lot in common. People love to debate both of their existences. People love to say how either does or doesn't affect the one group, when in reality, it affects everyone in the long term." And so I would also argue that another commonality between the fight against racism and climate change is that they can appear quite intimidating, daunting, and maybe at times discouraging. So I guess I wanted to ask, Anya, what inspired you to become an activist for these substantial and very important causes, and at such a young age? I think you began at in the womb, or age 5, I think is what I read. And what keeps you hopeful for the future? There I go, back to that hope question.
Yeah. So to start off, I began my work in the community, so my philanthropic work, when I was 5. The first community initiative I ever started was a holiday gift-giving charity for children who suffered from severe neurological disabilities. And my mom had a huge influence on, you know, of course, helping me navigate that. And I have to say that before politics even got into the picture or became, you know, a care in my mind, my most important lesson was, prioritizing compassion is what makes a leader. It's not about, being likable. It's not about being able to control anything or, dictate an outcome. It's about being able to be that person that recognizes the needs of someone that may not share your circumstance. And, my mom never prayed for me to be the smartest girl or to be, the popular kid. She always prayed that I would learn to be compassionate and that I would grow to, work and walk in my purpose and with my heart first. And I think that, that's ultimately what's continued to propel me, even when it comes to politics, which is, as we all know, is a very dangerous game as a Black woman, especially someone who is very outspoken, who is unapologetic about being in the streets, about speaking her mind. Those are scenarios that we as Black women often end up in, in dangerous scenarios. And we have way more risk to deal with when we as Black women decide to put ourselves out there in that way. But I think that, understanding the importance of compassion and moving forth determined to make sure that the people that don't have a platform, the people that are marginalized and don't have a voice of their own, feel represented by someone who is willing to sacrifice the privilege that they had as someone who grew up in a middle class family, or someone that is lucky enough to be receiving a college education right now, or someone that is lucky enough to have been surrounded by other great minds and young revolutionaries that have done the work before me and that have pioneered in so many ways. That knowledge and that experience is so valuable. And there's so many people in this world that do not have the opportunity to benefit from that or to even grace environments where such things are present. So as someone who is as fortunate as that, I feel it's my responsibility to pay that forward and to allow, not only generations that will come after me, but just paying respects to the people that came before me by moving forth in that purpose. And, like you mentioned, climate change, I talk about environment a lot because my foundation began in STEM. Before I got into politics, I was a huge STEM nerd. I thought I wanted to be a veterinarian. I was always in the dirt, and the mud with the worms and everything. And I was not a girly girl at all. And I had like the deepest spiritual connection to nature before, I had any concept of anything else. And, as politics became a bigger and bigger part of my life and my way of thinking, I really started to pay more attention to how disproportionately, Black people were involved in the climate conversation. Even when I involved myself in STEM programs or, innovative summer camps and all these things, I was always one of like a handful of Black girls in like a sea of white and Asian kids. And as someone who grew up in West Orange, New Jersey, which is a super, super diverse, area in North Jersey, I never understood the concept of, being that only one or being, made to feel different or uncomfortable because of the way I looked or because of the way I dressed, because of my hair. And that was what propelled me to investigate politics, to investigate, well, why is race such a pivotal part of people's placement, whether it be in STEM, whether it be in normal life, whether it be in any career industry. And I like opened Pandora's box of all the things going on in the world. And, my concept of, this joyous worldview you have as a kid was completely shattered. And I was like, oh my God, everything sucks. Why is no one talking about this? And I remember just feeling compelled to like breach that conversation and talk about how race and gender and all these different, self-identifiers factor into so much of the crap that people are suffering from in society. And no one else my age was listening to me. Everyone was like, oh, you're depressing. Anyways, and I was like, oh my God, like, this can't just be real to me. Like, there has to be some other network of young people or some other sphere of existence where people are acknowledging these things and people are, doing the work to combat these narratives and disrupt them and change the scope of where we're going ultimately. And, that entire soliloquy of events is what propelled me to, educate myself aggressively about different political parties, different political dynamics, the history of the civil rights movement, how the European worldview that was, structured and that matured in this country has filtered in and infected many other nations overseas. We're seeing what's happening now in the Middle East. America's fault. We're seeing all of these things happening in Haiti and in other countries in the Caribbean. America's fault. And it's just all of these different things. And, I just feel like as long as I've, been alive, I've always been really curious. And I've always been someone that has always been open to learning and open to experience. And simply understanding that these kind of liberal and progressive mindsets, which are often deemed anti-American or, too radical or too extreme, they all share a common ground of criticizing this European worldview. It's not just criticizing America. It's not just criticizing white people. It's criticizing the idea that, since colonization began, that European worldview has maintained the importance of control over necessarily fairness or equity or all of the things that would make this society a perfect world. That European worldview is what continues to separate. And that, corresponds to all things, whether it be race, gender, sexual orientation, you name it. That, narrow way of viewing the world is what breeds hate. It's what breeds all of these different things: exploitation, corruption, inequity in the environment and healthcare, and every issue you could possibly think of, you can trace it back to that, construct, that European worldview. And I think that once we understand that regardless of your race, you can criticize that worldview and you can understand that it is what is dividing us, that color line and those biases that exist so prevalently today in the mass majority of our population are all inherently from that worldview. So once you acknowledge that, there's nothing you can't pick apart. There's nothing you can't pinpoint and say, oh, okay, that's problematic, or there's nothing that truly will make you feel as though, you're a product of that. If you can say, okay, I was raised to believe this way, but that comes from this way of thinking, this worldview. Not everyone on earth is destined to be aligned in this worldview. So when you're able to, I think what I'm trying to get at is when you're able to acknowledge how much of an impact the European worldview has had on the marginalization of people, you can start to extract all the other worldviews: the Black, the Afro worldviews, the Latinx worldviews, the LGBTQ plus worldviews, and you can start to build on those. And you can start to normalize the nuances within each of them until ultimately, as Ms. Clayton was saying, someday soon, we can look at society and see all of these worldviews having an equal prevalence and having, this equilibrium in existence where we can all coexist and we can all network and connect and have peaceful discourse that leads to real solutions. That's goal is to allow everyone that same freedom of living, that same, capability for success that, a lot of people of color are fighting for individually today. So, yeah.
Thank you, Anya. That goal actually is what I wanted to end our discussion with. I feel that, so fortunate, so blessed, so lucky to have had here at my disposal, this incredible brain trust. So I'm going to ask each one of you this particular question, because I feel like we can just solve everything right here, right now. We have these dynamic women. We're just going to wrap it up, solve everything right here, right now. So the question is, how can we achieve Black liberation? What needs to happen on the individual levels, local, structural levels, so that Black people can thrive? And so if you could keep your answers short, because as I said, we're going to wrap it all up. We're going to solve everything right here, right now.
Who you want to start with? Does it matter?
Who would like to start?
I'll start. I think if each of us made the responsibility our personal goal to change somebody, your neighbor, the person you work with, somebody you just met at a bar, you're going to change that person who has a negative attitude. Because what is that expression about one teaches one, and goes on and on. I've had the pleasure. Wasn't always very pleasant, but you probably know that I'm recorded in history as the person who changed the life, the work, the thinking of the Grand Dragon of the Ku Klux Klan. And when I retrospectively analyze what happened, what did I really do? I think I operated from a simple philosophy that, we can love each other. We can be taught it, we can make it happen, we can shame them into it. Take whatever method you want to employ to get your neighbor to treat you as he would himself, as the Bible talks about. Love thy neighbor as thyself. I'm wishfully thinking, and maybe hopelessly wishing, that one of these days I could just spearhead a conference that everybody loved everybody. Sounds so simplistic. But when I think about it, it's not, impossible, because I've had it happen. You can change people. Use whatever method, shame them, just show them, but get out there and do it. And then that's when we're going to have a better world. And until then, we may not. And so it's worth trying. That's my attitude, it's worth trying. Love everybody. It can be done. As simple as it sounds, it's not an unconquerable task. And I recommend we find a way that folk know you know them when they don't look like you. Start there. Be patient when they don't understand, and get your heart right before you started, of course, because people can make you mad, but you're not trying to get anger out of this. You try to get hope and reconciliation and love and understanding. And it sounds simple because it is. Thank you.
Thank you. Ashley, did you want to go next?
Sure. I mean, what Miss Clayton said, as per usual, my dad would say, would paraphrase what she said and say, ain't nothing to it but to do it, right? That's the work. I believe that anything less than Black liberation in my lifetime is a cop-out. And I believe that, as Mama Nair Watkins would often say, we have everything we need in our bones to do it, right? We just got to do it. We got to practice liberation. We've got to practice justice. We've got to practice loving each other. It's not just a value set. It's a doing thing. It's a doing thing. So regardless of if you're Black or not, if you want to be down with the Black liberation movement, follow proven Black leaders. You got 4 of them right here on your screen. If you don't know where to go to find them, call me up, man. My email address and phone number are all over Al Gore's internet. Hit me up. I'm accessible. I'd love to introduce you to all my Black friends to get you involved. And the way you get involved might look a lot of different ways, right? Like Miss Clayton said, you might just start with your neighbor or your friends or your church folks or the folks that you go to mosque with or the folks you go to synagogue with or the folks that you club it up with, whatever. Talk to your people, right? That's the first step. Second thing you can do is like other things that are accessible to you. If you can cut a check, right? If all you can do is wear movement t-shirts like this Free Purpose Pain t-shirt that I'm wearing right now, wear the t-shirts, get the swag, right? If you can call your senators, your congresspeople, your local elected officials and advocate for policies like the Breathe Act, the For the People Act, right? Like the Red, Black, and Green New Deal, right? Like any of these progressive pieces of legislation that actually would change everything, not just reform what we know to be a system that is working exactly as it was designed, right? But actually transform the system so that we don't have to fight like this anymore. Call your senators, right? If you can email, if you can tweet, if you can Facebook, whatever, just get in where you fit in. The last thing that I would say is like, remember that as we're talking about peace and what is required of us to get to that land where there is peace for all people, that peace isn't just cooperation, right? That's not synonymous, right? Or like people being like, oh, these protesters don't want peace. That's not true, right? That's a false narrative, right? What peace is the presence of justice. is the presence of love, is the presence of liberation and freedom. So let's build that. You know, Karen said that she was remembering the song, We've Come This Far by Faith. I would say faith without works is dead. And that's the work to build a Black liberation movement worth a damn. And why I know we can win is because our OGs have been singing a song called Victory Is Mine for longer than I've been alive, y'all. They said victory today is mine. So let's go win it.
Yes, let's go win it. And Anya.
The spirit. I couldn't have said it any better than Miss Henderson. And I think I would just like to say that I always try to encourage people, no matter what you choose to do to be an ally or to be a part of this movement, you have to remember to maintain your own sense of hope and your own joy. Because once you lose your joy, you will have no motivation in this life. You will have no strength. And as a Black woman, you cannot sacrifice that. As a Black man, you cannot sacrifice that. As a Black person, you cannot allow anything to take away your joy in this life, in this movement, in this fight, because otherwise they win. So regardless of what you choose to do, I say do it all if you can. But, you know, regardless of what, always stay educated, always ask what you don't know, and always maintain your joy and protect that joy and make sure that you're the person in your network of young melanated people that is maintaining everyone else's joy and making sure that no one else around you forgets the importance of protecting that, because that is ultimately our saving grace. So, yeah.
Our saving grace. So I think we all have our marching orders, right? Enjoy, organize, buy the t-shirt, wear the t-shirt. So that's about all the time that we have for today's discussion. Ms. Clayton, Ashley, Anya, it's been an absolute pleasure. I'm truly honored to have been a part of this very powerful conversation, as I am sure every one of our listeners is. So thank you for being here. Thank you for being here in this room, but also here on the planet at this time. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.